The first crack of lightning split the sky like heaven itself had torn open, and Beatrice Whittaker knew in that terrible moment that her life was about to change forever. The thunder followed with such violence that the windows of her small homestead rattled in their frames. And then came the wind, a howling, furious thing that seemed determined to sweep away everything she had built over the past 2 years of living alone on the Nebraska plains. "Lord Almighty," she whispered, clutching the door frame as she watched the storm roll in across the grasslands, dark and menacing against the setting sun of July 1873. Beatrice had weathered storms before since moving west after losing her parents to influenza. At 26, she'd grown accustomed to the solitude and challenges of frontier life, learning to handle herself and her modest cattle operation with quiet determination. But something about this storm felt different, more vengeful, more personal. The wind screamed louder, and she felt the entire structure of her small house shudder. With growing horror, she watched as a portion of her roof lifted, boards groaning in protest before they surrendered to the storm's might. A terrible cracking sound filled the air as shingles and timber tore free, exposing the interior of her home to the elements. Rain poured in immediately, drenching her quilt-covered bed and the simple furnishings she'd so carefully arranged. Beatrice moved quickly, gathering what valuables she could: her mother's silver hand mirror, the family Bible, a small lockbox containing her meager savings, and shoving them into a canvas bag. She had just managed to pull on her oilskin coat when a particularly violent gust tore away another section of roofing. Debris flew through the air, and a falling beam narrowly missed her head. This was no longer about salvaging possessions. This was about survival. Beatrice fought her way outside, the wind nearly knocking her off her feet. Her small barn seemed to be holding, and she could hear the frightened lowing of her 3 milk cows inside. At least they were sheltered, but where was she to go? The nearest neighbor was the widowed Mrs. Peterson, a good 4 miles east. Through the sheets of rain, Beatrice suddenly noticed the approach of a rider. A tall figure on horseback was making his way toward her homestead, leaning forward against the driving storm. For a moment, fear gripped her. Strangers on the frontier could mean trouble, especially for a woman alone, but desperation quickly overcame caution. The rider dismounted with fluid grace despite the howling wind, securing his horse to what remained of her front porch post. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his features obscured by the wide brim of his hat and the darkness of the storm. But when he spoke, his voice carried a surprising gentleness that contrasted with his imposing silhouette. "Madam, you can't stay here. That roof's about to give way entirely." Beatrice clutched her bag tighter. "I have nowhere to go. My nearest neighbor is miles away." The man glanced up at the ruined roof, then back at her. Water streamed from his hat brim as he studied her and what remained of her home. Lightning flashed again, illuminating his face for just an instant, strong-jawed, with eyes that seemed to assess the situation with calm precision. "Name's Xavier Everett, madam. Got a place about 2 miles west. It's sturdy and dry." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "You'll have shelter with me till it's built again. That roof won't fix itself, and you can't sleep under open sky." Beatrice hesitated. The proposition from a stranger would normally be unthinkable, but the remaining section of her roof chose that moment to groan ominously. "I don't know you, Mr. Everett." Another crack of thunder punctuated her words, and more of her roof tore away in the wind. "No, madam, you don't," he acknowledged. "But I know Mrs. Peterson speaks highly of you, and right now you're out of options." He gestured toward the darkening sky. "Storm's getting worse. We need to move now if we're going to make it before full dark." The mention of Mrs. Peterson, who was notoriously particular about character, gave Beatrice a moment's reassurance. She glanced back at her disintegrating home, the rain already soaking through her coat despite the protection of the remaining overhang. "My cows," she said, nodding toward the barn. "They'll be safer there than trying to move them in this. We'll check on them once the storm passes." He extended a gloved hand toward her. "Miss Whittaker, Beatrice Whittaker." His nod was respectful. "Miss Whittaker, we need to go, now." Another board splintered overhead and Beatrice made her decision. She took his outstretched hand, surprised by the warmth of it even through the leather glove. "Just until the storm passes," she clarified, raising her voice over the wind. Something that might have been a smile flickered across his face. "Of course." Xavier helped her mount his horse before swinging up behind her. One strong arm encircled her waist to keep her secure as he turned the animal into the wind. Beatrice clutched her bag with one hand and the saddle horn with the other, acutely aware of the stranger's solid presence at her back. It had been years since she'd been this close to a man, and despite the dire circumstances, she couldn't help but notice the strange comfort his nearness provided. They rode in silence through the worsening storm, Beatrice's thoughts alternating between worry for her home and unease about placing her trust in this unknown man. Yet there was something reassuring in the confident way he guided his horse through the near blinding rain, choosing paths that offered some shelter from the wind whenever possible. After what seemed like hours but was likely less than 40 minutes, the outline of a substantial homestead emerged from the gloom. Unlike her modest dwelling, Xavier Everett's home was a proper two-story structure with a wide covered porch. A large barn stood nearby, its doors securely battened against the storm. "Almost there," he said, his breath warm against her ear as he leaned forward to be heard over the wind. They reached the house, and Xavier dismounted first, reaching up to help Beatrice down. Her legs felt unsteady after the hard ride, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. His hand steadied her at the waist, strong and sure. "I've got you," he said simply before turning to his horse. "Let me get Tempest to the barn, then we'll get you inside and dried off." Beatrice nodded, huddling on the porch as Xavier led his horse away. She took the moment alone to collect herself, brushing ineffectually at her sodden skirts and trying to smooth her rain-matted hair. She likely looked a fright, but such vanities seemed silly when she'd just lost her roof. When Xavier returned, he was carrying a lantern that cast warm light across the porch. In its glow, Beatrice got her first good look at the man who had offered her shelter. He was perhaps 30, with dark hair that curled slightly where it was wet at his collar. His features were weathered from sun and wind but handsome in a rugged way, with a straight nose and a strong jawline covered in a day's growth of beard. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a striking shade of gray-blue that regarded her with quiet intensity. "Let's get you inside, Miss Whittaker." He opened the door, gesturing for her to enter. The interior of Xavier Everett's home surprised Beatrice. Unlike the sparse, utilitarian spaces common to bachelor homesteaders, his front room was comfortably furnished with a settee, 2 armchairs, and bookshelves lined with volumes. A fire already burned in the stone hearth, suggesting he'd left it banked before riding out. "You ventured into that storm deliberately?" Beatrice asked suddenly, realizing he must have left his own secure home to ride out. Xavier hung his dripping hat and coat on pegs by the door. "Saw the storm front coming and was concerned about the Petersons and you being out that way with less substantial structures. Mrs. Peterson's son arrived yesterday from Omaha, so I knew she'd be looked after." He shrugged as if it were the most natural thing in the world to risk himself for neighbors. "Your place was next on my route." "That was very considerate," Beatrice said, touched by the simple decency of the act. "Just being neighborly." He gestured toward a door off the main room. "There's a bedroom through there you can use. It was my sister's when she stayed with me last year. I'll find you something dry to change into." Beatrice clutched her bag tighter. "I have some things here, though they may be damp." Xavier nodded. "I'll bring you hot water for washing up." "Kitchen's that way," he pointed to another doorway. "I'll have coffee and something warm to eat ready when you're settled." Left alone in the small but tidy bedroom, Beatrice took a deep breath. The events of the evening felt surreal. Just hours ago, she had been secure in her own home, independent and self-sufficient. Now she was under the roof of a man she'd only just met, dependent on his kindness until she could rebuild. The thought of rebuilding sent a wave of exhaustion through her. It had taken nearly all her savings to establish her homestead in the first place. Where would she find the money to replace the roof? And could she do it before winter set in? A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Miss Whittaker, I've brought hot water and towels." Beatrice opened the door to find Xavier holding a steaming basin and several clean towels. Behind him stood a young girl of perhaps 14 or 15. "This is Lily," Xavier said, nodding toward the girl. "She helps around the place during the day. Her family lives about a mile south. Storm caught her here, so her pa agreed she should stay put tonight." Relief washed through Beatrice at the presence of another female in the house. It made the propriety of the situation much less questionable. "Pleased to meet you, Lily," she said with a genuine smile. "Miss Whittaker's home was damaged in the storm," Xavier explained to the girl. "She'll be staying with us until it can be repaired." Lily's eyes widened with concern. "Oh, madam, I'm so sorry to hear that. If you need any help with your things, I'd be happy to assist." "Thank you, Lily." "That's very kind." Xavier set the basin down on a small washstand. "I'll leave you ladies to it. Supper in 20 minutes if that suits." After he left, Lily helped Beatrice sort through her damp belongings, hanging what could be salvaged near the small fireplace that Xavier had lit in the bedroom. The girl chattered comfortably about her family, the weather, and her work helping Xavier keep house. "Mr. Everett's the best employer in the county," she confided as she helped Beatrice unlace her sodden boots. "Pays fair and treats everyone with respect. My brothers work his cattle sometimes, and they say the same." "He has a cattle operation?" Beatrice asked, curious about the man whose home she'd be sharing. "Yes, one of the more successful ones hereabouts. Started small 5 years back and built it up steady. He's smart about breeding and grazing." Lily's admiration was evident. "And he reads more books than anyone I ever met, even the schoolmaster." This additional information painted a more complete picture of Xavier Everett, not just a good Samaritan, but a successful rancher and an educated man. It eased some of Beatrice's anxiety about her situation. By the time they joined Xavier in the kitchen, Beatrice felt somewhat more presentable in her one dry dress, a simple blue cotton garment she'd thankfully wrapped in oilskin inside her bag. Her damp hair was neatly braided and pinned up, and while she still felt the chill from the rain in her bones, the hot water and change of clothes had done wonders for her spirits. The kitchen was warm and inviting, with a large wood stove radiating heat and a sturdy table set for 3. The aroma of beef stew filled the air, making Beatrice suddenly aware of her hunger. "Please sit," Xavier said, pulling out a chair for her. "Nothing fancy, I'm afraid, but it's hot and there's plenty of it." "It smells wonderful," Beatrice said sincerely, taking the offered seat. Supper was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Lily kept conversation flowing with stories about her siblings and local happenings, while Xavier mostly listened, occasionally asking a question or offering a wry observation that revealed a subtle humor Beatrice wouldn't have guessed at from their first meeting. When the meal was finished, Lily insisted on clearing the dishes while Xavier and Beatrice moved to the front room. The storm continued to rage outside, rain lashing against the windows, but the solid walls of the house kept them safe and dry. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness tonight, Mr. Everett," Beatrice said as they sat before the fire, she on the settee and he in one of the armchairs. "I dread to think what might have happened if you hadn't come along." Xavier shook his head. "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "I'm not so certain of that," she replied softly. "And fewer still would offer ongoing shelter while repairs are made." A shadow crossed his face. "About those repairs, Miss Whittaker, please call me Beatrice," he nodded. "Beatrice, then." "And I'm Xavier to my friends." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The damage I saw to your roof was substantial. It will require significant materials and labor to repair properly." "I'm aware," she said, unable to keep a note of worry from her voice. "I have some savings, and perhaps the bank might extend credit. What I'm trying to say," he interrupted gently, "is that I'd like to help. I have the materials, the tools, and I can arrange for labor from among my hands." Beatrice stiffened slightly. "That's extremely generous, but I couldn't possibly accept such charity." "Not charity," Xavier said firmly. "An investment in a neighbor. This is hard country, Beatrice. None of us survives alone." She wanted to protest further but realized he was right. The frontier demanded cooperation for survival. Still, her pride resisted. "I would need to compensate you somehow." Xavier considered this. "Your cattle operation, it's dairy, correct?" "Yes, just 3 jerseys, but they give good milk. I make butter and cheese to sell in town." "My operation is beef cattle exclusively. I've been thinking of adding a small dairy component." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Perhaps we could consider the roof in exchange. I provide the materials and labor. You provide consultation on establishing a dairy operation and assist with the initial setup." The proposition was sensible, a fair trade of expertise and resources rather than charity. Beatrice felt her resistance easing. "That seems equitable." A small smile curved his lips. "Then we have an agreement." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. His hand was calloused but warm around hers, and the contact lingered a moment longer than strictly necessary. Beatrice withdrew first, suddenly conscious of the impropriety despite Lily's presence in the next room. "When the storm passes, we'll assess the damage properly," Xavier said, apparently oblivious to her momentary discomfort. "In the meantime, you're welcome here for as long as needed." "Thank you." Beatrice stifled a yawn, the exhaustion of the evening finally catching up with her. Xavier noticed immediately. "You must be tired. Please don't feel obligated to keep me company." "It has been rather an eventful day," she admitted. "Then I'll bid you good night." He stood, gesturing toward the bedroom door. "If you need anything, my room is upstairs. Lily is in the small room off the kitchen." Beatrice rose as well. "Good night, Xavier, and truly thank you." He nodded once, and something in his expression, a softness that hadn't been there before, made Beatrice's heart beat a little faster. She turned quickly toward the bedroom, unsettled by her reaction to this near stranger who had so thoroughly disrupted her carefully ordered existence. As she prepared for bed in the small, neat room that had once belonged to Xavier's sister, Beatrice tried to focus on practical matters, what could be salvaged from her home, how long repairs might take, whether her cows were truly safe in the barn. but her mind kept returning to the image of Xavier Everett illuminated by firelight, his gray-blue eyes reflecting warmth as he extended his hand in agreement. "This is merely a temporary arrangement," she whispered to herself as she slipped beneath the quilts. A practical solution to an unfortunate situation. But as she drifted toward sleep, the howling storm outside contrasting with the snug security of Xavier's sturdy home, Beatrice couldn't quite convince herself that nothing had changed. Something had shifted in her orderly world, and she suspected it had little to do with the missing roof over her homestead. Dawn broke clear and calm, the storm having spent its fury sometime in the night. Beatrice woke to the smell of coffee and the quiet murmur of voices from the kitchen. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place her surroundings. Then the events of the previous evening came rushing back: the storm, her ruined roof, Xavier Everett's timely arrival and offer of shelter. She dressed quickly in yesterday's blue dress, now fully dry, and pinned her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror on the wall was familiar yet somehow changed, as if the upheaval of her circumstances had marked her in some subtle way. In the kitchen, she found Xavier and Lily already at the table, a spread of eggs, bacon, and biscuits between them. "Good morning," Xavier said, rising as she entered. His hair was damp, as if he'd recently washed, and he was freshly shaven. The effect was striking. He looked younger, his features more defined without the shadow of stubble. "I hope we didn't wake you," Lily added, pouring coffee into a third cup. "Not at all. I'm usually up with the sun." Beatrice took the seat Xavier held for her. "Though I confess I slept more soundly than expected, given the circumstances." "Nothing like a good roof over your head," Xavier said, then winced slightly at his own words. "Sorry, that was thoughtless." Beatrice surprised herself by laughing. It was accurate, if a bit pointed. The slight tension broken, they ate breakfast with the same easy conversation of the previous evening. Xavier outlined his plans for the day: first to check on Beatrice's property and livestock, then to begin assessing what materials would be needed for repairs. "I thought perhaps you might want to accompany me," he said, "to collect any additional belongings and see the damage in daylight." "Yes, I'd like that very much." The thought of seeing her ruined home filled her with dread, but it needed to be faced. "I'll come too," Lily offered. "Maybe there's things that need drying out or cleaning up. My ma always says many hands make light work." "That's kind of you, Lily," Beatrice said gratefully. They set out an hour later, Xavier on his horse Tempest with Beatrice riding behind him again. While Lily followed on a gentle mare, Xavier kept for light work around the ranch. The morning was brilliantly clear, the storm's violence having cleaned the air to a sparkling transparency that made every blade of grass and distant tree stand out in sharp relief. As they approached Beatrice's homestead, she felt Xavier tense slightly. Following his gaze, she saw why the damage was far worse than it had appeared in the darkness and driving rain. Not only was the roof almost entirely gone, but one wall had partially collapsed, exposing the interior of her home to the elements. Items she hadn't been able to grab in her hasty departure lay scattered across the sodden ground: books, clothing, kitchen implements flung by the wind's careless hand. "Oh," she whispered, the single syllable containing all her shock and dismay. Xavier's hand covered hers where it rested at his waist. "I'm sorry, Beatrice." They dismounted, and Beatrice approached her home with slow, reluctant steps. The damage was comprehensive. Rain had soaked everything inside, and mud from the collapsing wall had coated what the rain hadn't ruined. Her chest tightened with grief. This place had been more than shelter. It had been her bid for independence after losing her parents, tangible proof that she could make her own way in the world. The barn seems intact, Xavier said, already moving toward the structure. Let's check on your cows. Grateful for the distraction, Beatrice followed him. To her immense relief, all 3 jerseys were unharmed, if rather disgruntled at the late milking. With Lily's help, she quickly attended to them while Xavier examined the barn structure. "Solid as can be," he pronounced when she'd finished. "Your builder knew his business here, at least." "Different man," Beatrice said, stroking one cow's flank. "The house was already standing when I purchased the property. The previous owner had died and his family back east wanted a quick sale. The barn I had built last year." Xavier nodded thoughtfully. "That explains it. The house was likely one of the first structures in the area built quickly with green timber that warped over time, makes it vulnerable to this kind of damage." Lily had wandered back toward the house. "Miss Whittaker, I think some of your things in the back room might be salvageable. The wall's still standing there." Together, they spent the next several hours sorting through Beatrice's belongings. Some items were beyond saving. Her mattress was a sodden mass that would never dry properly, and many of her books were ruined. But others could be recovered with care. Her mother's china survived intact in a cabinet that had somehow remained upright, and a trunk containing winter clothes had kept its contents mostly dry. Xavier, meanwhile, made a thorough assessment of the structural damage, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound book he carried in his pocket. His expression grew increasingly grave as the morning wore on. Finally, as noon approached, he called Beatrice over to where he stood examining the foundation. "I won't sugarcoat this," he said quietly. "The damage is extensive. The foundation has shifted on this side, which is why the wall collapsed. It's not just a matter of replacing the roof." Beatrice's heart sank. "What are you saying?" He met her eyes directly. "I'm saying that repairing this structure would cost more than building new, and even then, the underlying issues would remain. You'd likely face similar problems with the next bad storm." The blunt assessment hit Beatrice like a physical blow. "I can't afford to build a new house," she whispered. "I just can't." Xavier's expression softened. "Let's take a step back. There's no need to make decisions this minute. We've gathered what can be saved and your livestock is secure. Let's return to my place, have some lunch, and consider options with clear heads." His calm practicality steadied her. "Yes, that seems wise." They loaded the salvaged items onto a small wagon Xavier had brought along, hitched to Lily's mare. The girl insisted on driving it back while Beatrice again rode with Xavier. As they prepared to leave, Beatrice took one last look at the ruins of her home, trying to accept that she might never live there again. "It's just a structure," Xavier said softly, seeming to read her thoughts. "What matters is that you're safe." "It was more than that to me," she admitted. "It was freedom, independence, proof that I could stand on my own. I understand." Something in his tone suggested he truly did. "But independence doesn't have to mean isolation, Beatrice. Even the strongest of us need help sometimes." She didn't respond, not trusting her voice. Xavier didn't press, simply helping her onto his horse before mounting behind her. As they rode away, Beatrice allowed herself to lean back slightly, drawing comfort from his solid presence. It had been so long since she'd had anyone to rely on, she'd almost forgotten how it felt. The ride back to Xavier's ranch passed in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Lily rode ahead with the wagon, occasionally pointing out wildflowers or birds to lighten the mood. By the time they reached Xavier's home, Beatrice had composed herself. She would face this setback with the same determination she'd faced every other challenge in her life. Somehow, she would find a way forward. After a simple lunch, Lily departed for her own home, promising to return the next day. Left alone with Xavier, Beatrice felt a sudden awkwardness descend. The easy camaraderie of the morning's shared task had faded, leaving them as what they were, a man and woman, relative strangers, now sharing a home under unusual circumstances. "I should check on my cattle," Xavier said, breaking the silence. "Would you care to join me? It might give you some ideas for the dairy consultation you promised." Grateful for the suggestion, Beatrice agreed. They walked together toward the larger pastures beyond the barn, where a substantial herd of Hereford cattle grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. "You've built quite an operation," Beatrice observed, genuinely impressed by the size and quality of the herd. "It's taken time and plenty of mistakes along the way," Xavier admitted. "I knew nothing about cattle when I first came west. I was a bookkeeper in Boston." This revelation surprised her. "What brought you here?" A shadow crossed his face. "The war changed many things. After Gettysburg, I couldn't face returning to ledgers and counting houses." Beatrice absorbed this. "He would have been young during the Civil War, perhaps just 20 or so. You fought for the Union." "Yes." "Massachusetts 20th Infantry." His voice was neutral, but she sensed the memories were anything but. "My brother died at Antietam," she said quietly. "With the Ohio Volunteers." Xavier stopped walking, turning to face her. "I'm sorry, many good men were lost. Too many." Beatrice rarely spoke of Thomas, the pain of his loss still sharp even after more than a decade. "He was older than me by 6 years, always my protector. After he died, and then my parents to the influenza a few years later, there seemed nothing to keep me in Ohio. The West offered a fresh start." "I understand that sentiment all too well." Something passed between them, then a recognition of shared experience, of lives altered by circumstances beyond their control. They continued walking, the conversation turning to lighter topics as Xavier showed her his operation. He was clearly proud of what he'd built, but spoke of it with a self-deprecating humor that charmed Beatrice, despite her determination to maintain emotional distance. "And here's where I thought to establish the dairy," he said eventually, leading her to a smaller pasture near the barn. Good grass, close to the processing area, sheltered from the worst winds. Beatrice assessed the space with a professional eye. "It's well situated. How many cows were you thinking to start with?" "Perhaps 5 or 6. I've been reading about Jerseys and Guernseys, trying to determine which might be best suited. Jerseys give richer milk, better for butter and cheese, but less volume than Guernseys," Beatrice explained, warming to the subject. "It depends on your market. Are you planning to sell milk directly or focus on butter production?" Their discussion of dairy farming continued as they completed the tour of Xavier's property, which turned out to be considerably more extensive than Beatrice had realized. By the time they returned to the house, the awkwardness between them had dissipated, replaced by the comfortable rapport of two people with shared interests and complementary knowledge. "You know a great deal about cattle," Xavier observed as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "More than just dairy operations. My father raised beef cattle in Ohio before the war," she explained. "I grew up learning the business. When I came west, I chose dairy because it required less land and initial investment, but the principles are similar." "You should have seen my first attempts at ranching," Xavier said with a rueful smile. "I paid far too much for inferior stock, had no idea how to manage grazing lands, and nearly lost everything that first winter. If not for the kindness of neighbors who saw my ignorance and stepped in to advise, I wouldn't be here." "Is that why you rode out into the storm for me?" Returning the favor, his expression grew serious. "Partly, but also because I know what it is to be alone in this country. It tests even the strongest spirit." Beatrice felt a sudden tightness in her throat at the simple understanding in his words. "Yes," she agreed softly. "It does." Their eyes met and held for a long moment. In the fading light, Xavier's gray-blue gaze seemed deeper, more intense. Beatrice felt her pulse quicken and looked away first, unsettled by her reaction. "I should start supper," she said, rising quickly from her chair. "It's the least I can do to repay your hospitality." If Xavier noticed her sudden retreat, he gave no indication. "I'd welcome the help. I'm a passable cook at best." In the kitchen, Beatrice busied herself with meal preparation, grateful for the distraction of practical tasks. She was behaving foolishly, allowing herself to be affected by kind words and understanding glances. Xavier Everett was being neighborly, nothing more, and she would do well to remember that. Yet as they worked side by side preparing a simple meal of salt pork, beans, and cornbread, Beatrice found herself sneaking glances at his profile when she thought he wouldn't notice. There was something compelling about him, not just his physical presence, though that was undeniable, but the quiet competence he brought to everything he did. Supper was a pleasant affair, their conversation ranging from books they'd read to the challenges of frontier life. Xavier proved to be well-read and thoughtful, with opinions that sometimes surprised Beatrice. "Most men I've met out here consider education wasted on women," she remarked, when he mentioned admiring Mary Wollstonecraft's writings. "Most men are fools," Xavier replied simply. "Intelligence isn't determined by gender, and this country needs every sharp mind it can get, regardless of whether it belongs to a man or woman. That's refreshingly progressive," he shrugged. "My mother was a schoolteacher before she married. She educated my sister and me equally, much to my father's occasional consternation. But he couldn't argue with the results. My sister now runs a successful millinery business in Chicago." After the meal, they settled in the front room again. Outside, night had fallen completely, the vast prairie darkness broken only by stars that seemed impossibly bright and close. "May I ask you something, Xavier?" Beatrice said after a comfortable silence. "Of course. Why have you never married? A successful rancher with your attributes must have had opportunities." She immediately regretted the personal nature of the question, but Xavier didn't seem offended. "There were some possibilities in the early days," he admitted. "But after the war, I found it difficult to connect, and then building the ranch consumed all my attention." He paused, staring into the fire. "What about you? Surely there were suitors in Ohio." "One or two," Beatrice acknowledged. "But after losing Thomas and my parents so close together, I became cautious with attachments. Then, when I decided to come west, it seemed simpler to remain unattached." "Simpler, perhaps, but lonelier too," Xavier observed quietly. "Yes," Beatrice agreed, surprised by her own candor, "though I've grown accustomed to it." "Have you?" His question was gentle but direct, his eyes searching hers. Beatrice found she couldn't quite meet his gaze. "We adapt to what life gives us," Xavier nodded slowly. "That we do, but adaptation isn't the same as thriving." The conversation had ventured into territory that made Beatrice increasingly uncomfortable. She stood, smoothing her skirt. "It's getting late. I should retire." "Of course." Xavier rose as well. "We have a busy day tomorrow if we're to start planning your new home." His words caught her off guard. "My new home?" "Well, we've established that repairing the old one isn't practical, so we need to build you a new one." He stated this as if it were the most obvious conclusion in the world. "Xavier, I told you I can't afford to build new. You can if you're smart about it. Smaller footprint, efficient design, salvaged materials where possible, and labor exchanged rather than paid for." He spoke with the confidence of someone who had thought the matter through. I've been considering it since we saw the damage this morning. Beatrice shook her head, torn between gratitude for his concern and frustration at what seemed like presumption. It's not that simple. No, it's not, he agreed. It will be hard work and it will take time, but it's possible. He took a step closer to her, his expression earnest. Let me help you, Beatrice, not out of charity, but because it's what neighbors do, what friends do. The sincerity in his voice was impossible to doubt. Still, Beatrice hesitated, years of self-reliance making it difficult to accept such significant assistance. I need to think about it, she said finally. Xavier nodded, respecting her need for space. Of course. Take all the time you need. Good night, Xavier. Good night, Beatrice. In the quiet of her borrowed bedroom, Beatrice sat on the edge of the bed, emotions churning. Xavier's offer was generous, more than generous, but accepting it would mean acknowledging that she couldn't manage alone. It would mean allowing someone else into the carefully constructed independence she'd built around herself. Yet hadn't that independence already been shattered by the storm? Her home was gone, her possessions scattered. If she refused Xavier's help out of pride, what would that leave her? Beatrice sighed, recognizing the battle within herself for what it was, fear disguised as self-sufficiency. The truth was, Xavier Everett unsettled her not just because she was reluctant to accept his help, but because she found herself drawn to him in ways that went beyond gratitude or neighborly regard. This is madness, she whispered to herself. You've known the man 2 days. But as she prepared for bed, Beatrice couldn't quite dismiss the warmth that had blossomed in her chest when Xavier had called her his friend, or the way her pulse had quickened when their eyes met in the sunset's glow. Sleep came slowly that night, her dreams a confused mixture of storm winds, falling timber, and a pair of steady gray-blue eyes that seemed to see straight to her soul. The next week passed in a blur of activity. After careful consideration, Beatrice had accepted Xavier's offer to help build a new home, with the understanding that she would contribute her labor, her dairy expertise, and eventually repay the cost of materials when her operation was profitable again. Xavier had been true to his word, approaching the project with thoughtful efficiency. They had salvaged what they could from her old homestead, then methodically begun planning the new structure. It would be smaller but sturdier than her previous home, with proper foundations and a roof designed to withstand prairie storms. Several of Xavier's ranch hands had volunteered their assistance, apparently eager to help the new lady, as they called Beatrice. Their ready acceptance of her presence in Xavier's life temporary, though it was meant to be occasionally, caused her moments of discomfort. But their respectful manner and genuine willingness to help soon won her over. Lily continued to come daily, helping Beatrice restore her salvaged possessions and keeping the household running while construction planning was underway. The girl's cheerful presence often acted as a buffer in those moments when the awareness between Beatrice and Xavier grew to intense moments that seemed to be occurring with increasing frequency. On this particular morning, Beatrice was in Xavier's kitchen, preparing a substantial midday meal for the men who were scheduled to begin laying the foundation for her new home that afternoon. The actual construction site was closer to her barn than the previous house had been, positioned on slightly higher ground that Xavier assured her would provide better drainage during heavy rains. She was so absorbed in her cooking that she didn't hear Xavier enter until he spoke from just behind her. Something smells wonderful. Beatrice started, nearly dropping the spoon she was using to stir a pot of beef stew. Xavier, I didn't hear you come in. Sorry to startle you. He moved to lean against the counter beside her, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and the outdoors on him. I wanted to let you know that the lumber delivery arrived. We can start the actual framing tomorrow if the foundation sets well today. That's wonderful news. Beatrice smiled up at him, then quickly returned her attention to the stew. These moments of proximity had been happening more often, Xavier finding reasons to stand near her, to assist with tasks that didn't strictly require his help. Each time, the air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken awareness. The men are grateful for the hot meal, Xavier continued. Johnson said his wife thinks I'm working everyone twice as hard on your house as I do on ranch projects. I hope that's not true, Beatrice said, concerned. Xavier's laugh was warm and genuine. It's not, but they are putting in extra effort. I think they're competing for your approval. That's silly. They hardly know me. They know enough. There was something in Xavier's voice that made her look up again. His expression was serious now, his eyes intent on her face. You've impressed them with your resilience and your willingness to work alongside them. That earns respect out here. Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks under his steady gaze. I'm only doing what's necessary. With grace and determination, he added softly. Not everyone manages that. Before she could formulate a response to the compliment, Lily burst through the back door, her arms full of fresh herbs from the small kitchen garden. Miss Beatrice. I found a whole bunch of thyme and some late summer sage. Will that do for the stew? The moment between Beatrice and Xavier broken, they moved apart naturally, Xavier to collect the water bucket for Lily while Beatrice examined the herbs. These are perfect, Lily. Thank you. The rest of the day was consumed with feeding the work crew, then observing the foundation work at Beatrice's property. By the time they returned to Xavier's home that evening, Beatrice was exhausted but satisfied with the progress. It's really happening, she said as they sat on the porch after supper, watching fireflies blink in the gathering darkness. Lily had gone home, leaving them alone as had become their evening routine. A week ago, I thought I'd lost everything, and now you're rebuilding, Xavier finished for her, better than before. There was something in his tone that suggested he might be speaking of more than just her house. Beatrice glanced at him, finding his gaze already on her. Yes, she said softly, better than before. Xavier shifted in his chair, turning more fully toward her. Beatrice, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. His serious tone sent a flutter of nervousness through her. Yes. The new house should be habitable within 3 weeks, weather permitting. That's wonderful progress, she said, uncertain where he was leading. It is, but I've been thinking about your cattle operation. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. The dairy consultation you've been providing has been invaluable. I've learned more from watching you with your jerseys these past days than from all my reading before. I'm glad to help. It hardly balances what you're doing for me, but that's just it, he interrupted gently. I'm not keeping ledgers on who owes what. This isn't a transaction to me, Beatrice. She fell silent, waiting for him to continue. What I'm trying to say is that I think we could benefit from a more permanent arrangement. He took a deep breath. I'd like to propose a partnership. A partnership, Beatrice repeated, not sure she understood. Yes. Your dairy expertise combined with my beef operation. Shared resources, shared labor, shared profits. His eyes never left hers as he spoke. Your new house would be yours entirely, but the business would be ours together. Beatrice stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. You want to go into business with me? I do. Xavier leaned forward, his expression earnest. Think about it, Beatrice. You're already planning to expand beyond your 3 cows once you're settled again. I've been wanting to diversify beyond beef. Together, we could build something significant, something neither of us could manage alone. The proposal was unexpected but not unattractive from a business perspective. Xavier was right, their skills were complementary, and combining operations could benefit them both. Yet Beatrice sensed there was more to his suggestion than practical considerations. "Why?" she asked simply. Xavier held her gaze steadily. "Because I've come to respect your knowledge and your character, because I think we work well together." He paused, then added more quietly, "And because I've grown accustomed to having you here, and I find I'm not looking forward to when that changes." The admission hung in the air between them, its implications clear. This wasn't just about business. Beatrice's heart raced. "Xavier, you don't need to answer now," he said quickly. "Take time to consider it. It's an important decision." She nodded, grateful for the reprieve. "I will think about it carefully." "That's all I ask." He smiled, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Whatever you decide, your home will be ready as promised. This doesn't change that." "Thank you." Beatrice rose from her chair, suddenly needing space to sort through her turbulent thoughts. "I think I'll retire early tonight. Tomorrow will be another busy day." Xavier stood as well. "Of course." "Good night, Beatrice." "Good night, Xavier." In her room, Beatrice paced the floor, Xavier's proposal turning in her mind. A business partnership made logical sense. She could see the potential benefits clearly. But the personal implications were what troubled her. Xavier had all but admitted he had feelings for her, and if she were honest with herself, she harbored similar feelings for him. In the 2 weeks since the storm had brought them together, Beatrice had come to admire Xavier's quiet strength, his intelligence, and his fundamental decency. She enjoyed his company, looked forward to their evening conversations, found herself watching for his return when he was out on the range. These were not the reactions of someone merely grateful for assistance, but was she ready to entangle her life with another's again? After working so hard to establish her independence, could she willingly share that independence, even with someone she was coming to care for deeply? Sleep eluded her that night, and when morning came, Beatrice was no closer to a decision. She threw herself into the day's work with extra vigor, as if physical exertion might clarify her thoughts. The foundation of her new home had set well, and the framing was progressing rapidly. Xavier had designed a simple but sturdy structure with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a small front room. It would be cozy but functional, with several improvements over her previous home, including proper insulation for the harsh prairie winters. As she worked alongside the men, handing up tools and bringing water when needed, Beatrice found herself watching Xavier. He moved with confident efficiency, clearly experienced in construction as he was in ranching. The men respected him, that much was obvious, but it was more than just respect for an employer. There was genuine affection in their interactions, a camaraderie that spoke of Xavier's fair treatment and personal interest in their welfare. At midday, when the work crew broke for the meal Lily and Beatrice had prepared, Xavier approached her with a cup of coffee. "You've been quiet today," he observed, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I have a lot on my mind." He nodded, understanding without pressing. "The framing should be complete by tomorrow. Johnson's wife is a skilled seamstress. She's offered to help with curtains and such when we reach that stage." "That's very kind of her." "This community takes care of its own," Xavier said simply. "You're part of it now, Beatrice." The words warmed her in a way that had nothing to do with the hot coffee in her hands. She had been so focused on her independence that she'd forgotten the value of belonging. Perhaps that was what Xavier was truly offering, not just a business partnership or even a romantic attachment, but a place in a community, roots that went deeper than a solitary homestead. As if reading her thoughts, Xavier continued, "Whatever you decide about my proposal, that doesn't change. These people are good neighbors. They'll be there for you either way. Beatrice studied his face, touched by his understanding. "Thank you for that. It means a great deal." Xavier smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in a way that had become endearingly familiar. "We should get back to work if we want to finish the framing before dark." The afternoon passed quickly, and by sunset, the skeleton of Beatrice's new home stood outlined against the darkening sky. It was a powerful sight, tangible proof that destruction could be followed by renewal, that what was broken could be rebuilt. As they rode back to Xavier's ranch, Beatrice found herself thinking about renewal of a different kind. The life she had carefully constructed for herself had indeed been shattered by the storm, but perhaps that wasn't entirely a tragedy. Perhaps it had created space for something new to grow, something stronger and more meaningful than what had come before. That evening, after Lily had gone home and they had finished a quiet supper, Beatrice finally broke the silence that had lingered between them throughout the meal. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she began, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Xavier's expression remained neutral, though she noted the slight tensing of his shoulders. "And the business aspects make sense," she acknowledged. "Our operations would complement each other well." "But," he prompted gently when she hesitated. "But I think we both know this isn't just about business." Beatrice met his eyes directly, determined to be honest. "There's something growing between us, Xavier. I'd be a fool to pretend otherwise." "Yes," he agreed, his voice deep and steady. "There is. It frightens me," she admitted. "I came west to be independent, to prove I could stand on my own. Becoming entangled wasn't part of my plan." "Life rarely follows our plans," Xavier said with a slight smile. "I certainly never planned to be a cattle rancher in Nebraska when I was keeping books in Boston." "True enough," Beatrice acknowledged. "But this is different. This is choosing to change course, not having change thrust upon me." Xavier rose from his chair and came to sit beside her on the settee, close but not touching. "May I speak plainly, Beatrice?" She nodded, her heart racing at his nearness. "I respect your independence. It's one of the qualities I most admire in you. But I've learned that true strength isn't found in standing alone, it's found in choosing to stand with others, even when you don't have to." His eyes held hers intently. "What I'm proposing, both in business and personally, isn't about diminishing your independence. It's about building something together that honors both our strengths." His words resonated deeply with Beatrice, addressing the very core of her hesitation. "You've given this considerable thought." "I have," he acknowledged. "These past weeks with you have made me realize how empty this house was before, how incomplete my life had become without my even noticing." The raw honesty in his voice moved her. This was no practiced courtship speech, but the genuine revelation of a man who had, perhaps, been as lonely as she had been, for all his success and community connections. "I can't promise I won't struggle with this," Beatrice said softly. "Independence becomes a habit, and habits are hard to break." "I'm not asking you to break it," Xavier replied. "Just to expand it to include the possibility of partnership in all things." The distinction was subtle but important. Beatrice felt something shift within her, a recognition that what Xavier offered wasn't the surrender of her hard-won independence but its natural evolution. "I need to be sure," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "For both our sakes. When my home is complete, I should live there for a time, establish my new routine. If we still feel this way, then perhaps we could explore what a partnership might look like." It wasn't the immediate acceptance Xavier might have hoped for, but his expression showed understanding rather than disappointment. "A sensible approach," he agreed. "Though I warn you, my feelings are unlikely to change." The certainty in his voice sent a pleasant warmth through Beatrice. "Nor are mine, I think," she admitted. but I need to know that for sure. Then that's what we'll do. Xavier reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and took her hand in his. May I call on you properly once you're settled in your new home, Miss Whittaker? The formal request, delivered with a touch of humor that acknowledged their unusual situation, made Beatrice smile. You may, Mr. Everett. I would welcome it. His fingers tightened slightly around hers, and for a moment Beatrice thought he might kiss her. Instead, he simply raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles that was somehow more intimate than a conventional embrace would have been. I look forward to it, he murmured against her skin. The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity as Beatrice's new home took shape. The weather remained cooperative, allowing the work to progress steadily. True to Xavier's prediction, the basic structure was completed within 3 weeks of the storm, though some interior finishing remained to be done. During this time, Beatrice and Xavier settled into a comfortable routine of shared work and quiet evenings. Their understanding had eased any awkwardness between them, allowing their growing feelings to develop naturally without the pressure of immediate decisions. The day Beatrice was to move into her new home dawned clear and mild, a perfect late summer morning. She packed her few possessions, both those salvaged from the storm and new items gifted by neighbors who had heard of her plight, with mixed emotions. There was satisfaction in reclaiming her independence, but also a surprising reluctance to leave the safety and warmth of Xavier's home. Xavier himself seemed equally conflicted as he helped load her trunks into his wagon. The place will feel empty without you, he admitted as they prepared to depart. You'll hardly notice once your dairy operation begins, Beatrice replied, trying for lightness. Those cows will keep you too busy for melancholy. Perhaps. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, though I doubt even the most demanding Jersey could provide the conversation I've grown accustomed to. The ride to her new home was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Lily had gone ahead earlier that morning, determined to have everything ready for Beatrice's arrival. As they crested the small rise that led to Beatrice's property, she gasped in surprise. A small crowd had gathered around her new house, nearly every neighbor within 10 miles, it seemed, along with Xavier's ranch hands and their families. "What's this?" she asked, turning to Xavier. His smile was genuine now, pleasure replacing the earlier melancholy. "A house warming. It's tradition out here when someone builds new." Beatrice was deeply touched by the gesture. As the wagon drew closer, she could see that the gathering was indeed festive. Tables had been set up laden with food, children played in the yard, and someone was tuning a fiddle. Mrs. Peterson, Beatrice's nearest neighbor, was the first to greet her as Xavier helped her down from the wagon. "Welcome home, dear," the older woman said, embracing Beatrice warmly. "We're all so pleased to see you settled again." "Thank you," Beatrice managed, blinking back unexpected tears. "This is so kind of everyone." "Nonsense," Mrs. Peterson declared. "It's what neighbors do. Now come and see your house. Lily and I have been arranging things all morning." The interior of the new home was a delightful surprise. While the structure had been completed days ago, Beatrice hadn't seen the final touches. Curtains at the windows, a colorful rag rug on the front room floor, wildflowers in a jar on the kitchen table. Each item represented the contribution of a different neighbor, Lily explained excitedly as she led Beatrice through the rooms. The house was simple but solidly built, with large windows that flooded the rooms with light and clever storage solutions that maximized the compact space. Xavier had incorporated several thoughtful details: a bookshelf built into the wall of the front room, a deep windowsill in the kitchen perfect for cooling pies, a covered porch that would offer shade in summer and shelter in winter. "It's perfect," Beatrice said when they had completed the tour. "Truly, I couldn't have imagined better." "Xavier designed most of it," Lily confided. "He spent hours with paper and pencil making sure everything would be just right for you." This revelation added to Beatrice's emotional response to the day. She sought Xavier out among the gathering, finding him deep in conversation with Johnson about some aspect of the roof construction. "May I speak with you privately for a moment?" she asked, interrupting apologetically. "Of course." Xavier excused himself and followed her to a quiet corner of the porch. "Is something amiss with the house?" "Not at all. It's wonderful." Beatrice took a deep breath. "Lily mentioned how much time you spent planning it, designing it specifically for me." Xavier looked slightly embarrassed. "I wanted it to be right. A home should reflect its owner. It does. It's practical and solid and—" She smiled, surprisingly warm for something so new. She reached out impulsively to touch his arm. "Thank you, Xavier, for everything." He covered her hand with his own. "You're welcome, Beatrice." For a moment they stood in silence, connected by touch and the understanding that had grown between them. Then Mrs. Peterson called for attention, announcing that the food was ready and the moment passed. The house-warming celebration continued well into the afternoon, with music and dancing following the meal. Beatrice found herself welcomed into the community in a way she hadn't experienced in her 2 years of solitary homesteading. There were invitations to Sunday dinners, offers to share seed for her kitchen garden next spring, practical gifts of preserves and linens to replace what had been lost in the storm. Through it all, Xavier remained a steady presence, never intrusive but always nearby. Beatrice watched him interact with their neighbors, joking with the men, tipping his hat respectfully to the women, swinging children up onto his shoulders with easy strength, and felt her affection for him deepen further. As evening approached, the gathering began to disperse, families heading home before darkness fell. Eventually, only Xavier, Lily, and Mrs. Peterson remained to help with the final cleanup. "I should be getting home myself," Mrs. Peterson said when the last dishes were washed and put away. "My son will be wondering where I've got to." "I'll drive you," Xavier offered. "It's on my way back to the ranch." "And I should go too," Lily added. "Ma will need help with the little one's bedtime." Suddenly, Beatrice was faced with the reality of spending her first night alone in her new home. The prospect, which had seemed so appealing in theory, now filled her with an unexpected sense of loss. "I'll come by tomorrow," Xavier said as they stood on the porch, the wagon ready to depart, "to check that everything is functioning as it should." "I'd like that," Beatrice replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her emotions. Mrs. Peterson, perceptive as always, patted Beatrice's hand. "The first night in a new home is always strange, dear, but you'll find your rhythm soon enough." After they had gone, Beatrice moved through her new house, lighting lamps as darkness fell. Everything was arranged perfectly, yet the spaces felt hollow without the voices and laughter that had filled them earlier. She had achieved what she wanted: her independence restored, her place in the community established, yet she found herself standing at the window, staring out at the darkening prairie with an inexplicable sense of longing. Sleep eluded her that night, despite the comfortable new bed with its fresh linens. The house made unfamiliar sounds as it settled, and the absolute silence between those sounds was profound after weeks of living under the same roof as Xavier, hearing his movements overhead or in the next room. By morning, Beatrice had reached a decision. She rose early, tended to her cows, and then sat at her new kitchen table, composing a letter. She was just sealing it when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Xavier arrived with supplies: fresh coffee, some early apples from the tree near his barn, a loaf of bread Mrs. Peterson had sent. His expression was carefully neutral as he greeted her, but Beatrice could see the question in his eyes. How had her first night alone been? "Come in," she invited. "I've just made tea." They sat at her kitchen table, the morning sunlight streaming through the eastern window, highlighting the auburn tints in Xavier's dark hair. He looked tired, Beatrice thought, as if his sleep had been as disturbed as her own. "How does the house feel after a night?" he asked, accepting the cup she offered. "Quiet," Beatrice replied honestly. "Too quiet, perhaps." A flash of something hope crossed Xavier's face before he schooled his features. "That will change as you settle in, make it truly yours, perhaps." She hesitated, then pushed the sealed letter across the table toward him. "I wrote this for you this morning." Xavier looked surprised but took the envelope. "May I?" At her nod, he broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. His eyes moved quickly over her neat handwriting, then stilled. When he looked up, the emotion in his gaze nearly took Beatrice's breath away. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "I am," Beatrice confirmed. "Last night made everything clear. I've built my independence, proven to myself that I can stand alone. But that doesn't mean I have to, or that I want to anymore." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "I accept your proposal, Xavier, both parts of it." The joy that transformed his face was something Beatrice knew she would remember for the rest of her life. He rose from his chair, drawing her to her feet and into his arms in one fluid motion. "Beatrice," he murmured, one hand coming up to cradle her face. "May I kiss you, please?" she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing passion as she responded. It was everything a first kiss should be: tender and exciting, familiar yet new. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Xavier kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I think I've been waiting to do that since the moment you agreed to ride with me through that storm," he admitted. Beatrice laughed softly. "And I think I've been wanting you to since about the same time." He kissed her again, more briefly but with no less feeling. "So a partnership," he said when they separated, "in business and in life." "Yes." Beatrice's certainty surprised even herself. "Though we should probably do things properly. People will talk otherwise." Xavier's smile was warm with affection and a touch of mischief. "We wouldn't want to scandalize Mrs. Peterson." His expression grew more serious. "Will you marry me, Beatrice Whittaker? Not just for propriety's sake, but because I've come to love you and I want to build a life with you, whatever that life may hold." The simple declaration, spoken in the morning sunlight of her new kitchen, moved Beatrice deeply. "Yes, Xavier Everett, I will marry you, because I love you too, and because I believe we'll be stronger together than either of us could be alone." Their third kiss sealed the promise, a beginning rather than an ending. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, on a crisp October day with the prairie grasses turned golden under a brilliant blue sky. It was a simple ceremony held at Beatrice's new house, now to become their second home, as they had decided to make Xavier's larger ranch house their primary residence while maintaining Beatrice's property for her expanding dairy operation. Mrs. Peterson hosted the gathering afterward, her large yard festooned with ribbons and late-blooming wildflowers. The entire community turned out to celebrate, the same neighbors who had welcomed Beatrice to her new home, now toasting her marriage to the man who had helped build it. "Never seen a couple better suited," Johnson declared, raising his cup in salute. "The storm that tore apart Miss Beatrice's roof might have been the best thing to happen in these parts in years." Xavier, standing with his arm around his new wife's waist, couldn't disagree. "Sometimes destruction makes way for something better," he said, looking down at Beatrice with undisguised love. Something stronger, she agreed, returning his gaze with equal feeling. As the celebration continued around them, Xavier led Beatrice away from the crowd for a moment of privacy behind Mrs. Peterson's apple trees. "Happy, Mrs. Everett?" he asked, his hands resting lightly on her waist. "Extremely, Mr. Everett." Beatrice reached up to straighten his tie, a gesture already becoming familiar. "Though I'm still getting used to the name." "You have time," Xavier assured her, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "A lifetime, in fact." "A lifetime," Beatrice repeated, savoring the word and all it promised. "That sounds perfect." Their kiss was interrupted by Lily, calling them back for the cutting of the cake Mrs. Johnson had spent 3 days preparing. Hand in hand, they returned to their friends and neighbors, stepping together into the future. They would build a future far stronger and richer than either could have imagined on that stormy night when a damaged roof had brought them together. 5 years later, Beatrice stood on the porch of the main ranch house, watching as Xavier returned from checking the herds, their 3-year-old son Thomas riding proudly in front of him on Tempest's successor. The sight never failed to warm her heart, her husband's strong frame supporting their child, both of them sun-bronzed and smiling as they approached home. The years had been good ones. The dairy operation had expanded to 15 cows, producing milk, butter, and cheese that had developed a reputation for quality throughout the county. Xavier's beef cattle business had grown as well, and together they had created one of the most successful mixed operations in the region. But it was their personal happiness that Beatrice treasured most. Their partnership had indeed proven stronger than either could have been alone, each contributing strengths that complemented the other. Xavier's quiet steadiness balanced Beatrice's occasional impulsiveness, while her vision and innovation pushed him to consider new approaches he might otherwise have overlooked. And there was a love that had deepened with each passing season, with each challenge faced together, with each moment of joy shared. "Mama," Thomas called, waving excitedly as they drew closer. "Papa let me hold the reins, did he now?" Beatrice replied, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. "What a big boy you're becoming." Xavier swung down from the horse, then lifted Thomas to the ground. The boy immediately ran to his mother, wrapping his arms around her skirts and looking up with Xavier's gray-blue eyes in a face that otherwise strongly resembled Beatrice. "He's a natural horseman," Xavier said, approaching to place a kiss on Beatrice's cheek. "Takes after his mother." "Flatterer," she accused fondly, knowing full well that Xavier was the more accomplished rider. "Only stating facts, my love." His arm slipped around her waist as they watched Thomas run to greet Lily, who was emerging from the house. The girl, now a young woman of 19, had remained a cherished part of their household, acting as Thomas's nursemaid and Beatrice's assistant with the dairy work. "How is she today?" Xavier asked quietly, nodding toward the house. "Resting comfortably," Beatrice replied. "Dr. Mitchell says another week at most." Their second child was due any day, and unlike with Thomas's birth, which had been unexpectedly early and difficult, everything about this pregnancy had progressed smoothly. Beatrice had continued with her work until just 2 weeks ago, when Xavier had insisted she begin taking things easier. "And you," his gaze was tender as it searched her face. "Not overdoing it, I hope." "I'm perfectly fine," she assured him, "just eager to meet our daughter." "You're so certain it's a girl." "I am." Beatrice patted her rounded belly. "Call it maternal intuition." Xavier's hand covered hers. "Girl or boy, as long as both of you are healthy, I'll be the happiest man in Nebraska." The sincerity in his voice touched Beatrice as deeply as it had 5 years ago when he'd first proposed. Some things hadn't changed with time. That evening, after Thomas was tucked into bed with a story and Lily had retired to her room, Beatrice and Xavier sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching the stars emerge in the vast prairie sky. "You ever think about that night?" Beatrice asked, her head resting comfortably on Xavier's shoulder. "When the storm took my roof, often," he admitted, though not with any regret despite how frightened you must have been. "I was," she acknowledged. "But then this stubborn cowboy appeared out of the rain and said I'd have shelter with him until it was built again." She tilted her face up to his. "Little did I know that until would turn into forever." Xavier smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years together. "Best promise I ever made," he said softly, before lowering his lips to hers in a kiss that held all the warmth of their shared past and all the promise of their future together. As they sat entwined in the gentle evening, the home they had built not just of timber and stone but of love, trust, and shared dreams stood strong around them, sheltering them just as Xavier had promised on that stormy night when their story began.